All right, let's get into the body, right? We're going to talk about the nervous system, the muscular system, and the skeletal systems. We'll start with the nervous system. So this is where all our signals are being sent either out of the central nervous system from the brain out to the body, or sensory coming back into the body. We can look at it, right? Human movement system as a whole is an integration of the nervous system, skeletal system, and the muscular systems. Nervous system provides sensory, afferent, and motor efferent information. So we can think of sensory being sight, sound, feel, touch, right? That smell, all of our senses, obviously, we're becoming more aware. So that's an easy way for you to remember it. A, awareness, afferent, and motor efferent information. And then the efferent being we're making an effect. It's effecting, we're executing all these E words that we can think the signal is being sent from my brain through the central nervous system out into the body. And the neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. So I have a quick little picture, right? So a motor neuron specifically, and the muscle fibers that it innervates. So you have the nucleus of the nerve cell that's being, all of these little reaches out from the dendrites. The signal is sent down through the axon that has the little nodes of Ranvier in between our myelin sheath, little kind of insulation, little fatty insulation around that. And just that little bit of fat helps the signal be sent faster. It just conducts it more easily. And then that signal is sent through the neuromuscular junction to the muscles so that we can have a contraction. Now, the nervous system as a whole includes the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system, somatic and autonomic nervous systems specifically within those two. So somatic is where I'm going to be executing a movement. It's more muscular. I'm deciding to make a movement happen. Autonomic is all of your just autonomic systems that happen when I breathe, my digestion, it's my sexual arousal. It's things that I don't necessarily have a control over. They just kind of happen. Peripheral nervous system contains different types of sensory receptors such as mechanoreceptors, nociceptors, chemoreceptors, and photoreceptors. For us, we're mostly concerned with the mechanoreceptors. Muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organs are the two important sensory receptors, and these two help you to avoid being injured, right? They're the two that will help us to avoid being overstretched or overtensioned. You can think specifically of between the two of those is muscle spindle as being, let me see if I can find it here for you guys. A muscle spindle is going to be avoiding the overstretch of a tissue, and the Golgi tendon organ is going to be here we go. So right, muscle spindles provide information concerning muscle length and the rate of change in the length. So when we're stretching, or if we slipped, we want to make sure that we're not going to hurt ourselves. So these receptors, when a muscle is stretched, deformation of the muscle spindle activates the sensory neuron, which sends an impulse to the spinal cord where it synapses, causing the muscle to contract. So it just kind of protects you from being overstretched. The Golgi tendon organ we can think of as a little bit more attached to the tendon. So again, it's going to be looking at the increase in tension. So it's going to inhibit. Both of these are inhibitory. Spindles are going to facilitate activation of the muscle to protect you, whereas neural input from the Golgi tendon organs is going to inhibit the muscle activation. Both of these are thought to protect you from overstretching and over tensioning your system. When we look at the peripheral nervous system, right, we have the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems, like we talked about earlier, right? So just keep that in mind. The nervous system, right, it requires different electrolytes for proper function. So especially sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. When we get towards thinking about muscular contraction, calcium is going to be a very important one for us. We can think of just a developmental standpoint. Motor skill development often occurs in 3 stages. So cognitive, associative, and autonomous. And the nervous system develops as humans age from childhood to adulthood. So you can think, especially right when you're growing in your body physically, your skeletal system and your muscular system sometimes grow at a greater rate than your nervous system does. So when you hit a big growth spurt, that's why like babies don't always have their coordination, because their muscles and their bones are being developed, but their nervous system hasn't quite made all of the connections. And so when we have those growth spurts, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for us to catch up, so to speak. And that's why a teenager that's going through adolescence can be really, really athletic and move well and be coordinated, have that growth spurt, and then kind of, it seems like they're kind of awkward and weird in their body because their nervous system hasn't caught up yet. So moving into the skeletal system, right? Skeletal system provides the support, right? It protects and it gives us things to be able to contract muscles from. Two big divisions. We have the axial and the appendicular systems. Axial being more centrally located. It's like your spine, it's your rib cage, it's your hips, everything that you're going to be able to have your appendages attached to so that they can move and have an anchor to move from. Human bones act as attachment sites and as levers to produce movement when muscles contract. So we'll talk more about levers in a separate video. I think needs its own topic and its own discussion. But think about it. Muscles do not ever push. They only ever pull. Muscles are attached from one site, from an origin site to an insertion site, and they pull the muscle from bone to bone. And so every muscle in your body is a pulling muscle. Even if you think of a pushing movement, it's a pulling that actually gets the muscle to actually produce movement. Bone growth occurs throughout life and remodels itself with specialized cells called osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So blasts are your builders, and clasts are the ones that will take and get rid of old tissue that no longer is serving us and needs to be renewed. So we lay down new, healthy, stronger bone, and that the osteoblasts do that. Then we can think of, all right, generally we need to know that there are 5 categories of bones: long, short, flat, irregular, and sesamoid. Examples of these would be, long would be my femur or my humerus. Short would be like the muscles in my hand, the bones in my hand or in my feet. They're kind of short. Flat would be, an example is my sternum, right? Irregular can be all those weird ones like your vertebrae, it's things that are shaped in odd ways. And then the sesamoid, there's two good big examples of that being your patella, and in the bottom of your feet there are sesamoid bones, and they usually connected between 2 tendons and allow for movement to happen more easily. The vertebral column has 5 distinct regions. Make sure that you know these, right? Going from top to bottom, we go cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccyx. That's your tailbone. So think through those, right? We know certain characteristics about each of them, but we should also know, have a pretty good idea that there are about 7 of your cervical vertebrae. There's 12 of your thoracic, 5 big lumbars, and then 5 and 3 to 5 on our sacrum and coccyx. It can be a little bit dependent on your individual anatomy. In between each vertebrae is an intervertebral disc that acts as a shock absorber and assists with movement. We want to make sure that those are nice and healthy and have good form with our exercise so we don't have any issues with those. Joints are formed by one bone articulating with another and can be categorized by their shape, structure, and function, right? So when we think of those especially, mostly we're going to be thinking more on the synovial joints. And so you can see synovial joints have 6 major classifications: gliding, condyloid, hinge, saddle, pivot, and then our ball and socket joints. So again, go through, know what those are and what the difference is, and some examples of those. Synovial joints are unique with a synovial capsule, but they also contain other connective tissues such as ligaments and fascia that provide support. Osteokinematic is a description of bone movement, and arthrokinematic describes that movement specifically at the joint surface. And then it's important from a lifestyle standpoint, we know that exercise and proper nutrition can have a major positive impact on bone mass with the aging adult. So best thing you can do, strength train and eat well, right? Make sure we're getting enough calcium, vitamin D, especially if you're getting older, we should supplement with some of those things, and make sure we're having a good, well-balanced diet so that our body's not leaching any of those nutrients from our bones. And then finally, we go into our muscular system. The muscular system, right? Everybody loves a good strong muscular system. It is what links the nervous system and the skeletal systems and allows us to generate force throughout the human body. That's why it's the neuromuscular system. Muscles have a complex structure that includes different layers of connective tissue that surround the contractile muscle fibers. It's a very complex sequence of these that happen, and if we think about that, right, at the smallest unit, at the smallest level, we have myofibrils, and they consist of repeating sarcomeres, and the myofilaments, actin and myosin, which create the muscular contraction, aka the sliding filament theory. So make sure that you know the sliding filament theory. That's a big one. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is needed to create the energy for this process. So if we look specifically at these tissues, right, so we can see here, right, we have our muscle. It becomes, let me actually see, there's a better pic. So, right, the tendon and then into the actual muscle belly. On the outside, the outer layer, we have an epimysium, the deep fascia that's surrounding that muscle. And within there are individual fasciculi, right? And that is what houses several muscle fibers. But we see that there is then the endomysium here between the fibers. Then you have the actual individual muscle fiber, which is surrounded by the sarcolemma, and within that we have a sarcoplasm. Sarcoplasm is going to house a lot of the calcium that allows us to contract muscles, and then you have the individual myofiber, like I said, and the myofilaments. Thinking of the myofilaments, we have actin, which is a thin, and myosin, which is thick. So if I look at it in this view, I can see the individual myofibril here within everything. You have your thick myosin and your thin actin. Within that, you have a cross bridge. So these myosin heads they have a weak bond, but once the nervous system says, okay, we're going to contract, calcium is released, and that allows the actin and the myosin to contract, or to connect, and then to contract. So that myosin head will pull, it will attach to the actin and then pull. And so even down at this tiny little microscopic level, you have pulling happening to see the muscular contraction. What happens is we go from this position, and we see in the stretched muscle, there's lots of space here in this A band, so to speak, in the H zone. They're widened out. Once we start to get a contraction that happens, right, when the myosin cross bridge attaches to the actin, then it shortens. That H zone becomes narrower and the A band becomes closer together. Really, the A band doesn't change, but we start to see that the H zone disappears. In the fully contracted muscle, the H zone is completely gone, and we have crossing of the actin, and this is a contracted muscle. So you see that it shortens itself, and you lose some of this space here, right? The sliding filament theory, it's an important one to know, right? We can think, so the discharge of an action potential from a motor nerve signals the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the myofibril, causing tension development in the muscle. And that's when that shortens and you get this type of a change at a more cellular level, right? So that's pretty important to know. And the number of cross bridges that are formed between actin and myosin at any instant dictates the force production of a muscle. And that's why we kind of have this all or none principle, right? This all or none principle tells us that let's see if we have it right, that when arrival of the action potential at the nerve terminal causes release of a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, which diffuses across the neuromuscular junction, causing excitation of the sarcolemma. Once a sufficient amount of acetylcholine is released, an action potential is generated along the sarcolemma, and the fiber contracts. All of the fibers in the motor unit contract and develop force at the same time. So they have to do it simultaneously. They work together, and this is known as the all or none principle. Make sure that you know that. All right, so we have some of this. All right, this is being explained here too. So excitation, contraction, coupling describes the steps in the muscle contraction process involving the nervous and muscular systems. The electrolyte calcium and neurotransmitter acetylcholine are involved in the excitation contraction coupling process, like I said. All or nothing principle describes how a motor unit either maximally contracts or does not contract at all. So we need to have that threshold reached in order for the muscle to contract. Muscles involved with fine motor skills have motor units with fewer innervated fibers. That's why they're going to be a little bit more precise, and they're not going to have as much gross power. They're going to be things that we can do that's why we can manipulate and control things so finely with our hands and with our muscles in our eyes. They're more fine motor units. And then just big thing to know is difference between type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. Slow twitch muscle fibers, they're smaller in size, they produce less force, but they are more fatigue resistant. Type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers, larger in size, produce more force. We have larger muscles, but unfortunately they fatigue more quickly. So make sure that you know the differences and the things that are involved here in our nervous system, skeletal system, and our muscular system.